In this video, I'm going to lay down some of the initial ICs that I have in hand that will be part of my 286 build number 2. Also going to talk about some additional breadboard helpers, I'm going to call them, that I have ordered up. And I'll show you what I'm talking about there and hopefully how that will make for some better connections on my breadboards moving forward. At this point, I have the basic ICs that I'll be using set down on the breadboards. The 286 chip in that adapter, that is the first version of the adapter. I do have an updated version coming that is a little bit wider. So I've left 2 pins on the far left, and I think there's just barely 2 pins to the right. I might have to move that interrupt controller over slightly, or the latch to the right of it, to accommodate the updated 286 PCB breakout board. In the upper left, I've got a clock generator that I've put down. That will be actually my next video, is to talk through how I intend to connect in that clock generator into the circuit. Then I've got my PSOC, and I'm going to use that initially just for address decoding. I think most of the chip enable logic that I was using previously in the PSOC will go into the bus controller now. That's part of that bus controller to the right. Maybe eventually I'll pull out the PSOC and replace it with 7400 series logic chips, because what it's going to be doing, I think, is going to be pretty basic. So we'll see where that ends up. Then I've got the transceivers, and then I've got 4 latches. And actually, in the initial Intel drawing that I had shown, there were only 3 latches. I've added a 4th, so it's not just the addresses that I'm going to latch. I'm also going to address some of the control lines that will go over to my ROM and RAM and things like that. So I've added an additional latch there. And then to the right, you can see I've got my flash ROM, flash RAM. I am actually changing out the ROM a little bit. I'm going to go with a smaller ROM, I think. We'll see. This right here, these are the same size ROMs as I've been using. I do have a half size of those and a quarter size of those that I could use. Interestingly, the chips are still the same physical size, so they take up the same amount of space on the breadboard. It's just they disconnect 1 or 2 of the pins, the upper address lines. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of value in me swapping those out, but we'll see. I might pare them down to the smaller ones for now. One of the things I was running into with my first build, no matter how careful I am with breadboard wires, it seems like they always find a way to slip loose, especially if you're moving things around. It seems like even sometimes if you're not, they find a way to come loose. So I am working on how to improve that in this build, and I'm actually going to be using a series of what I'll call breadboard helpers. So here you can see what these breadboard helpers look like, and these are pretty basic in what they're going to do here. The upper left breadboard, even though it shows it with 2 rows of pins, only 1 row would have pins facing down that would go into the breadboard. The other would allow me to solder in wires. So this will allow me to create, I can cut this to whatever length I need, but let's say I need an 8 pin connection to something. I'll just cut this so that there's a 2x8 section. I'll put in 8 pins. Those will go into the breadboard. The other 8 I can actually solder wires to go to something else, maybe another one of these somewhere else on the board. It's still, single pins going into the breadboard, but they're kind of locked into this row. They're not going to slip up and out accidentally. So this is going to be a more robust connection for me. And I have a whole lot of these coming. I ordered 500 of those little guys, and they're easy to snip into the right size that you need. Down below that, I have you can see a 3x20 version, same thing. This would allow me to maybe connect in 2 pins going to, for example, the processor instead of a single pin, and then have a pin location to actually solder a wire. Just giving me extra flexibility that if I want a little bit stronger of a connection, for example, if I only was going to connect 2 pins side by side, I might not want just a single pin in each of those. I might want a pair of pins in each of those just to give it a more robust connection into the breadboard. Anyways, it's just an option for me to expand that a little bit. The upper right one, you can see, just expands this. That shows 4. The intention with that one really, though, is to connect between the middle rail on breadboards. So when I want to jumper the upper and lower half on a single breadboard, I'll just grab one of those, grab whatever width I need, cut it to width, and solder in the top pin and the bottom pin, leaving the 2 middle pins open. And you'll probably see me do that above and below the processor, because I might want to extend out those connections to the different signals to an extra set of breadboard rails right above or below it. And if I want, of course, I can then solder in wires into the middle 2 wires, or middle 2 pin locations. So not only will I jump sections of the breadboard, but I can also then use those same jumpers to connect in wires. Just giving me flexibility as I move forward. And then the lower right one is really just to bridge between 2 breadboards. So in my layout, that should allow me to jumper between 2 complete breadboards, including that gap that you see in my breadboards. So if I want to extend something, let's say over on the flash RAM side, I want to extend that up to the breadboard above it, I'll just use some of these. Now those aren't maybe as easy to snip, but I've got a little saw set up that lets me quickly cut these PCBs up so I can slice them into whatever widths I need to use. And the purpose of all that is to try to minimize wires coming out of the breadboard as I'm shifting things around or rewiring or whatever the case may be. And I've got a lot of all of these on order, so that would be great to have. And I'm probably going to actually pause the physical build out until I get those in stock, because I don't feel like wiring it and then pulling all the wires and rewiring this. Running breadboard wires is one of my least favorite things to do, especially when they really start to stack up, like when I'm working with all the address and data lines. So in the next video, what I intend to do is to start talking through my design thoughts around adding in this clock generator. I will also get a clone of my previous schematic, that Easy EDA project, going. So I'll clone the one I have and start updating it based on what you're seeing on the screen. So I've got to put some thought into, also how I'm going to physically wire all of this. And so things like the address and data coming out of the processor won't go straight to that bus board. They'll go through transceivers and latches first. So that's why I want to wait for those adapters, get some solid connections in from the interrupt controller, from the processor into the transceivers and latches, and then from the transceivers and latches into that bus board. And so I don't want to get too far without doing that right, because I don't want to come back and have to redo that. And those are connections that I've got pretty high confidence won't change once I get them in there, unlike things like some of these control signals and things that could change around quite a bit. So I think that's it for now. Next steps would be talking about clock generator and getting into building an updated schematic. Then after that, it'll be taking these adapters I get in and actually start getting the physical wiring taken care of. It'll be pulling out the current 286 breakout board and putting in the updated one, along with its, I'll call it a hat, its upper level that has all the LEDs to show status. And that will probably be a video all on its own, because that's going to be a whole ton of surface mount. and I can only imagine the challenges I'm going to have when I get into doing that. I did order a stencil for that, so I do intend to try it both with an oven. I have an IR oven that I can use to try to do that. I also have a hot plate, and so far the hot plate's been my favorite, so my guess is that's going to be the path I like the best, but I'm going to give both a shot and just see how it goes. So you can look forward to that video here at some point in the coming weeks.